a few weeks now removed from the sentencing back in December. I want to just start with how you are doing, how the defense team is doing.
We will be okay. It is gutting when you pour your heart and soul into something that you believe in, and it doesn't work out the way you hope it will. And the consequences of that are heavy. And so, it's been gut-wrenching. For 6 weeks of my life, I did almost nothing but Richard Allen. Andy Baldwin and I and our investigator, Matt Hoffman, who's fantastic, lived together in a condo in Logansport. It was, 24/7. And so it's hard, but we'll get through it. I hope and pray Rick will get through it, and we'll go on to the next step.
And how is he doing?
No one knows. He went through RDC, which is Reception Diagnostic Center, in record time. That is generally about 30 days. They do assessments. They meet with, mental health professionals if needed. And it's generally about a 30-day process. He got through in, I think, 6 days. I don't know why DOC continues to treat Richard Allen differently than any other person in the state of Indiana, but they do. They sent him back to Westville Control Unit. I talked to Kathy 2 days ago. She still could not contact him. So I don't know how he's doing. When we left sentencing, he was positive and looking forward to the next steps. So I hope he's doing well. I worry about that.
You mentioned next steps. We'll get to kind of where we are now and what those next steps look like. But I do want to remind people how you came on board this case in the first place, if you don't mind kind of taking us back to your initial involvement in this case.
Sure. I didn't know much about the case. I mean, I think everyone in Indiana probably heard about, 2 young girls murdered on a trail in northern Indiana, and that was about the extent of my knowledge. When Andy Baldwin was appointed, I know Andy, I think probably since he interned for my dad. So I've known him forever, and I have the utmost respect for him. And I kind of heard through the grapevine that he and Brad were going through some really surprising things. And I sent him a text and to let him know we've got a great bar association here in Johnson County. Everyone's just good people, supportive of each other. And I sent him a text that said, we're all thinking about you, we're all behind you, and if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. And then a couple months later, I got a phone call on my way to Wisconsin, and he said, hey, we need some help with these TUI requests and the forensic pathology. Would you be willing to come on board and help us with those things? And I said yes. And it was, all-encompassing from then on, pretty much.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You came on initially thinking we were going to be talking or maybe focusing on this kind of specific part of the case. Your role grew significantly to the point where you mentioned you're living with this team to do everything you can during this trial. Did you expect all of this as we sit here today?
No, shockingly. In hindsight, it should have been very evident. I knew that Brad and Andy had death threats. I knew that there was a lot of talk about it. But the extent of it, people, it's just a different environment now with social media. People chasing us around with cell phone cameras and, a constant influx of emails. That was not something I was expecting.
The focus of my questions are, of course, on the trial. So we'll talk about that in just a second. I do want to clarify, though, before the trial, before we took this thing to trial, did you visit Richard Allen in prison? And if so, what did you see or what did you hear?
Like, I can't talk about what Rick and I talked about. Yes, I did. There were several Zoom meetings. Those were the easiest because of the distance. It's a day to go see him. I did go see him. I wish everyone could take a tour and see the conditions where he was confined. I didn't see him at Westville. I saw him at Wabash Valley, and he was in a cage, basically, and not doing well at all. And as I got to know Rick, he's a super good guy. He has a sense of humor. He is incredibly compassionate and empathetic, and was really incredibly understanding and patient through the whole process.
So let me ask you this when we talk about the trial. Just point blank, first question. Did Richard Allen receive a fair trial in Carroll County?
I think that had the jury been able to hear the evidence that respectfully we believe should have come in, and Judge Gall ruled the way she did, and I'm sure she did so in a way that she felt was best. Respectfully, we disagree. That there's nothing uncommon about that. I think had the jury heard all of the evidence, seen all of the evidence, we would have had a different outcome.
Well, that's one of my questions on here. A major part of your defense were these things that the jury never even heard. So now that the gag order is lifted, and I know you're being respectful and this isn't over, so to speak, what can you or what do you want to say about the fact that a lot of that was never even heard?
Well, I think it probably changed the outcome of the trial. I think we had very viable suspects in alternate theories. They were able to describe the crime scene. We weren't. We had an expert Dawn Perlmutter, who wrote the handbook on ritualistic killings. She trains the FBI, she trains local law enforcement. And her testimony is that this is a textbook ritualistic killing. The composite sketches that look nothing like Richard Allen, which just goes to support the fact that, not a single person who was on the trail that day identified Richard Allen in court, and the descriptions they gave of him don't describe Rick Allen. So I think that had we been able to present our evidence and give the jury someone else, I think that we would have had a different outcome.
What about, from our perspective, when we had the opportunity to be in the courtroom, this seemed like a very engaged jury. Did you guys feel the same way? We felt like they asked a lot of good questions. We felt like they were listening. Did you guys feel the same way?
Yeah, they asked great questions and a lot of questions. I felt that they were engaged, and that's hard. It's hard to sit and listen. Imagine being in a class for 8 hours a day. That's hard. And they were very engaged, asked thoughtful questions, seemed to have some background on some things. And so, yeah, I applaud them and appreciate that.
So on that topic of the jury, was there, and these two questions kind of go hand in hand, in your opinion, was there a pivotal moment for you guys and for the state where you guys thought, the jury is maybe leaning one way or another? Was there a pivotal moment that you remember for either side?
No. I shockingly was genuinely surprised with the verdict. You know, it's so hard to read a jury, and you know, I try not to look a lot because I feel like that sometimes people can be offended by that. I don't want to invade their space, if you will, but when I did, I felt like we had, you know, no one seemed offended, no one seemed shut off at all. People seemed open to us. And I've had juries who, you know, found my client guilty, who said, you know, wow, you did a great job. If any of us never ever need an attorney, we're going to call you. You know, you don't have to, you can like us and still not fine for our client. I think we just felt very strongly that, I know we felt very strongly that there was reasonable doubt. The timeline for the state doesn't add up at all. And given the fact that they were so thoughtful, you know, we felt good about it. I think that when they viewed the evidence on Saturday, that I felt like might have been a pivotal moment, but we haven't been able to talk to any of the jurors. We would love to. We're not mad at anyone. We would love to have a conversation about what they thought. You know, did we do anything to offend them? You know, how can we be better if this comes back?
So when that jury broke for deliberation, you guys felt good.
Yeah, we did.
And then what happened? Why do you think that jury convicted Richard Allen?
Obviously, I presume they felt that the state had proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. There were some interesting reactions to what they listened to. So when they came in Saturday, they listened to both of his statements. And, you know, amongst the three of us, we had very in-depth conversations about whether we should keep those out. But Rick is so genuine and so adamant in the face of you know, the lies being told to him, the lie that, you know, there's scientific evidence that that's his voice on the video, the lie that there's scientific evidence that that's him in the video, the lie that there are eyewitnesses who saw him on the video. And he was so genuine and sincere. So we were going in, we knew that they were going to look at his statements, and we thought, okay, this is good because those are really great. And then they played the video from the phone, and it seemed to me that there was some disagreement amongst the jurors. They were listening very intently. Some of them had their eyes closed, their face down so that they could listen. And I was really struck by that because I thought, oh my goodness, they're trying to take that 2 seconds of Bridge Guy saying guys down the hill and match it to Rick. And they're listening to Brian Harshman say, yeah, that's him on the video. You know, he has no background, no training experience to say that. That's when I got worried.
There were a few specific things that happened that I wanted to mention, though. One of them, when we heard from Jerry Holman during the trial, who admitted that mistakes were made. How do you respond to that? How do you handle that as a defense team?
Well, look, in the course of a 5.5-year investigation with multiple agencies, you know, probably too many Indians, not enough chiefs, things are going to get missed, mistakes are going to be made. That's natural. The issue is when a mistake is made, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to try and fix it? Are you going to be transparent about it? Are you going to try to hide it? What's going on here? You know, thank goodness for Ferenczi and Kevin Murphy and Todd Click, and Todd Click especially, that he's the assistant Rushville police chief who paid an attorney, this is unheard of, to write a letter to the prosecutor to say, you're missing our suspects. Please pay attention to this, basically. And that wasn't turned over for months. And without that, I don't know, I wasn't involved then, but I don't know that we would have had the evidence that we had that we felt should have been presented to the jury.
Another key moment that happened was, and we've received a lot of questions about this, was the hair found at the crime scene. And one of the quotes when asking this expert, okay, why are we waiting to test it later? The quote that you said was, but this is the time, Richard Allen is on trial now. We've received a lot of questions about, okay, why aren't we testing the hair? And I'm sure you guys are probably asking a similar question.
Yeah, so science has evolved, as it always does. You can get, it's called SNP DNA, and use that and then run that through the forensic genealogical databases. So you have to hire two different labs, one to get this SNP DNA from a hair shaft, and then another one to do the forensic genealogy. And there was just a case in Hawaii, I think the Innocence Project probably were the ones, they went in and they were able to identify and exclude the person that they had charged. And I think this man was even in prison for a while. I can't remember the facts, but that came up during the trial, the man in Hawaii. So of course it can be done. And it was really disappointing because, we had met with the state's expert, and she talked to us about, they were putting together a SNP DNA lab to be able to do this. And then to come in and turn around and say, yeah, it's not really, reliable. Well, then why are you spending the money for a lab? And it is. It's been used in other cases, and the fact that she doesn't know that is a little disturbing. There is male DNA profiles from the fingernails that they haven't had tested. And I wonder if they understand and appreciate that the strength of their verdict isn't that strong, and they're waiting to see what comes next. But, that could be used to exclude Rick Allen. It may not point to someone, but it could be used to exclude him.
Because the rhetoric was, well, not yet, or we're still waiting on what?
The next trial? Yeah. I mean, there could be evidence out there right now that exonerates Richard Allen. There were, I think, over 15 hairs found at the scene. And here's the other thing. There were cigarette butts that they collected originally. They sent those off for forensic genealogy, and they were able to identify the profiles for the cigarette butts. There's a lot of forensic evidence that can be tested that could, point to someone else, or could be used to exclude Richard Allen.
So when we reconvened, when we were all back in the courtroom for the announcement of the verdict, nobody wins in this case. This is a horribly tragic case for everyone involved. But in the eyes of the law, the state won when they got that guilty verdict. Why do you think the state won in this case?
I can't say, I hope, again, we hear from some jurors or an alternate. I think that the tragedy is so great, right? I'm a parent. I can't imagine going through that. And the tragedy compounded by the facts and circumstances. And the jury, I think, feels like they want to do their job. And the only person they have to point the finger at is Richard Allen. And I can understand that. I can understand the families being angry at us. And I can understand the families wanting to have a conviction, because to some extent they'll never have closure, but it puts it to rest. It's kind of like the concept love is blind. You can overlook a lot of things to get where you feel you need to be. But convicting the wrong man isn't justice. This is tragic. This is beyond injustice. They have tortured him. The Mandela rules of the United Nations say that any solitary confinement over 15 days, much less 2 years, is torture. Indiana Department of Corrections regulations say anything greater than 30 days is, you can't do that. But because he was in there as a safekeeper and hadn't been convicted, the rules did not apply to him, is what they said. So the man who has more constitutional rights suddenly has fewer. And, absent that, I think this would have been had he been incarcerated like any other individual, I think this would have been a totally different case. I don't think he would have become psychotic. I don't believe any incriminating statements would have been made. And that totally turned the case.
So when we're all in that courtroom and the jury is delivering its verdict, take me back to that moment in your mind. You said we felt confident going into deliberation, and then that verdict comes down. What's going through your mind in that moment?
Just shock and sorrow. It's hard. I've been there before. That's one of the worst moments of my life. My dad dying in a car crash. In that and another verdict, it's one of the worst moments of my life. And I think we all felt like that. Brad Rosie is an incredible attorney, an incredible person. Andy Baldwin is an incredible attorney, an incredible person, and it was just gutted all of us. And Max Baker, Matt Hoffman, everyone who dedicated so much of their time and life to this, and to Rick, and I can't even imagine Kathy and his daughter. Rick was probably the most solid of all of us. He was prepared for that. I think in some respects it was a relief to him to have it over. In some respects, he was the one comforting us.
And in that moment, is there time to process, or is it, okay, next step, here we go? What does that look like for the defense team at that time?
We met right after the verdict and tried to unpack it a little bit. And I just wanted to come home. We went and talked to Rick back at the Cass County Jail, and besides the fact that the amount of stress and lack of sleep that we'd all dealt with, that on top of it, I think everyone just needed to retreat as fast as we could and unpack it and try to come to terms with it.
Is there anything, I know hindsight is 20/20, is there anything during that trial you would have done differently?
Well, as practitioners, I think we're all asking ourselves that question. And I think we perhaps didn't appreciate how the length of the trial was going to affect our presentation. And circling back to certain timeline things more often, maybe, with more visual, demonstrative exhibits may have been helpful. You know, I think we've all gone back and thought, should we have asked that question or not asked that question, or did we do something to offend the jury? And then there's some other evidentiary issues, but you know, hopefully there'll be another trial, and I don't want to forecast any of that in hopes of that next trial.
You mentioned you have not had the chance to talk to the jurors at this point. If you could talk to them today, what would you want to ask them?
I mean, I want to know what they felt was important. I'd like to ask them what they felt about the timeline. To me, and this was my area, right? So I have a deep-seated attachment to this. But if you believe the state's timeline, and you believe what the state story is, Libby's phone was under a shoe, under a body, from at the very, very, very latest, 3:50 p.m. on February 13th, and stayed there. And I've gone back again to look at the crime scene pictures. You cannot see that phone where it was, and it stayed there from 3:50 p.m. on the 13th until 12:15 p.m. on the 14th. During that time, according to the state, that phone never moved. Rick Allen never came back. But to me, the irrefutable evidence is at 5:44 p.m. on the 13th, someone manually plugged in headphones, and at 10:32 p.m. unplugged them. That is absolutely inconsistent with the state's timeline. That is consistent with those bodies weren't there at 5:44 or 10:32, or they certainly weren't there in the manner in which the state says they were. I think more likely the bodies were somewhere else. And so I'd really love to find out what they thought about that. You know, if they believed in the Apple discussion group that came off the internet. And again, I'm not mad at anyone. I respect their decision. I respect them. I appreciate the fact they gave up so much of their life to do this. As a practitioner, what did I do that you didn't like? I want to always be better and always improve. So those are the types of things I'd like to know.
After the trial had ended, state police had some strong words aimed at the defense team, including essentially calling you incompetent and that your work was ridiculous. Your response to that?
Sure, that was their work. If they're talking about the Odinist angle, we did not come up with that. I can assure you, Brad Rosie and Andy Baldwin didn't look at that crime scene and say, oh, there's Odinism here. Absolutely not. That came from the U.S. Marshal's Office BAU report. That came from the FBI agents we deposed. That came from the Todd Click, Kevin Murphy report. This was their evidence that we followed up on. And it was, I felt, very strong evidence. You had a man who said to one of the detectives, hey, if my DNA is found on the body, but I can explain it, will I be in trouble? So this wasn't something we made up. This is a legitimate line of investigation that we followed up on. I think that makes us good lawyers. I don't think that makes us incompetent. They called us unethical. That the personal attacks on the attorneys, I've never been involved. I've practiced in 3 states for, I think, 29 years. Math isn't my strong suit. I think 29 years. I've never been involved where there were such vehement and personal attacks on the attorneys. I felt respectful and nice to Nick and Stacy and Jim. I think they're good attorneys. I tried to be friendly. This is a month-long trial, and it's hard. It's hard for the families. It's hard for Rick. It's hard for Rick's families. And so I was really taken aback by that. It is absolutely untrue that any of us did anything unethical. When Doug Carter said, we had justice today, and if you don't like justice in this country, you can leave, I take umbrage with that. That's not our country. I would like to think, I hope, that we can all express our thoughts and beliefs and not be told we need to leave our country. If that were the case, the Memphis 3 never would have been exonerated. The Brooklyn 5 never would have been exonerated. My son wanted me to watch the hurricane with him. Reuben Carter. It's people speaking out in these types of cases that so often are the driving force in finally getting justice. There was a theme throughout the sentencing and carried out in the press conference, that a plea to Rick Allen not to appeal. He has an absolute constitutional right to an appeal. We believe strongly that mistakes were made and that he should appeal. He believes that too. And trying to induce him not to, I just don't think that's right.
You've mentioned justice a couple times. Did this jury, did this court give justice for the families of Abby Williams and Libby German?
With all respect to their decisions, because I know that they feel otherwise, no. Convicting the wrong man isn't justice. It's not justice for Abby and Libby. It's not justice for their families or friends or our system. It is absolutely, certainly not justice to Richard Allen. It only compounds the tragedy. It compounds the injustice. And so, no. Respectfully.
So that leads us to where we are now, and the fact that we expected that there could be an appeal process, and that's what we're seeing now. So talk to us about, is there one specific angle or area of focus in which the appeal process is happening, or are there kind of several things that have said, hey, these are all adding up and here's why we've decided to appeal?
Well, thankfully, some really fantastic attorneys have been appointed. Mark Lehman from Logansport, Stacy Juliana, who's a local attorney, and they are incredibly intelligent, fantastic appellate lawyers. I know what I believe should be included, but they're the appellate lawyers, and I would certainly defer to them. And that's what's great, to have people come in and take a second look and have that more objective opinion. We're so in the weeds right now, it's a little hard to unpack all of that.
So what does that role look like? Just because I don't know, for the three of you and then now the two new appellate, how does that kind of all mesh together?
We know, I don't know Mark, but Mark is friends with Brad Rosie. I know Stacy, Andy knows Stacy. So we'll work together as best we can to do whatever they need, to give them whatever they need, to help them with whatever they need. We're dedicated to Rick Allen. We're not stepping away other than to let them do what they need to do with all help that we can give them.
So for something like this, what does the timeline look like? What can we expect next?
Sure. So we need to make sure everything is in the record. There were some proceedings that happened after the jury view on that Saturday. So we're making sure that everything is clean in the record. There will probably be a motion to correct errors to make sure that's cleaned up. The judge can not rule on that, and it's deemed automatically denied. She can deny it, or she can set it for a hearing. So we'll see what happens with that. And then once that deadline, once that's ruled on, then they have 30 days to file a notice of appeal.
This case has been so emotional from the very beginning, let alone these last couple of months. How did you and your team handle just the hype around this case and the conversations and the attention that it was getting quite literally around the world?
Yeah, that I made a decision when I got involved to kind of keep my head down and not pay much attention to that because I thought it was going to be distracting. There were so many rabbit holes that we went down, and those were an incredibly small percentage of what was presented to us or we heard about through social media. And we just didn't have the time. We had 26 terabytes of data from the state. We had our own investigation and preparation and background and research. In hindsight, I think that was a mistake because I think that there were some things out there that may have affected certain things in the trial. But there are only so many hours a day. And, there were the 3 attorneys. We had fantastic investigators, Matt Hoffman, Max Baker, Brian Alvey. But we all have other cases. And even had we been able to dedicate our entire professional life, we wouldn't have had the time to get through all of that.
Because there was a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I would, my kids would send me things, my friends would send me things, and it was a lot, and it could be really distracting. And so now not only, one of the third-party suspects that we talked about back in July gave a lot of interviews on podcasts and things. And so, I would get in the car to go somewhere and turn on the podcast and hear what they had to say. And it just gave a whole nother level of the amount of information that was out there that we needed to deal with.
We talked briefly about just the emotion of this case. Indiana is home for you. You're a mom yourself. The emotions, the highs and lows of all of this for all of us who have been involved in it. What do you take away personally from this experience, either personally or professionally?
Well, my doctor would tell you I need to take a lesson in stress management. I can't imagine a better team than Brad Rosie, Andy Baldwin, Matt Hoffman, Brian Alvey, Max Baker, our staff. And it's affected all of us, my kids, my former husband, his wife, my siblings. Their support has been, really incredible. I knew going in it was going to be hard and stressful, and I was dedicated. These are my good habits. These are what I'm going to continue. By the end of the second week, all of that just went to the side. And it's hard. I dedicate my life. My kids are amazing. They're adults. And I dedicate my life to a system of justice that I believe deeply in. And to have an outcome that you feel is not just makes you question a lot of things, and it's hard. But I hope that I'll be a better lawyer for it and a better person for it. And I know we're all kind of working through this as best we can, but it is hard, and we're parents. I feel what they've been through is unimaginable. And we've all kept them in our prayers as well.
The world has watched this case now for nearly 8 years. What do you want and what do you hope that all of us take away from what has happened over the last 8 years?
Sure. I am really what happened to Richard Allen as a pretrial detainee, which is different than anyone else in the state of Indiana, should never happen. Every single person should be horrified by what they did to him at Westville and continue to do at Wabash Valley. Our society has no place for what they did to him. He was treated like an animal, and he's a human being. And, you know, this could happen to anyone. Richard Allen took a walk one day in the woods, and that's where this landed him. You know, and to be tolerant of people's opinions, to look at all the facts before you come to an opinion. That's all we ask, and that everyone try to be respectful of each other. We can all have different views, and we don't have to leave the country to have them. That's the great thing about our country, is that we can all express our views in a dignified and respectful manner.
What didn't I ask that now that you can talk about some of this that you want to say? Is there anything else?
No. Yeah, I appreciate you've asked some great questions, and I appreciate the media in how they responded. I know it was hard for everyone too. One thing I might say is, you know, an issue came up about cameras in the courtroom. You know, personally, that would have been really uncomfortable probably for the first day or two, but I think we would have gotten through it. But I think transparency gives validity and security to the proceedings, and without proceedings that have that validity, that security, you know, the system fails for everyone. And so it's made me rethink my position on those things. You know, I think not having cameras in the courtroom created this kind of frenzy and partial reporting and relying on other people that wasn't always accurate. So I think I've changed my views on cameras in the courtroom after this.